Hey everybody, that's piling on in. State Senator Brisport here. We'll get started in just a moment. Just letting a few more people come on in. Thank you for attending, by the way. Appreciate it. Again, if you're just coming in, State Senator Jabari Brisport, thanks again for coming to our state budget talk. I'm giving a few more moments for people to come on in. Okay, I see in the Q&A we have some comments about the chat being disabled. Try now. I think we have it set now. See, the chat works. Okay, I'm glad. Thank you for those who brought that to our attention. It's very helpful. Great. I want people to be able to use the chat. Oh, nice. You're from the Bronx. Great. Okay, so I think people are still trickling in, but I want to be respectful to your time. I know it's late and it's cold, and you're coming here after work, and I appreciate you taking time to be in this town hall with me to talk more about the state budget, which we are right smack dab in the middle of. Feel free to keep on introducing yourselves in the chat, your name, where you are chiming in from. Oh wow, somebody from, is that Oniata? Okay, great. From the Bronx. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I want to give a shout out to, I have some staffers on, including my chief of staff, Carl Clark, who's running the slide deck tonight, my deputy chief of staff, Liz Nell, my director of constituent services and organizing, Nick, who's helping me keep track of all your questions. Keep on introducing yourselves in the chat. Thanks again so much. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is a brief tonight. I think this will take about an hour, but this is the basic agenda of what we were trying to do tonight. First bullet point, I'm going to explain what's in the state budget loosely. It's a very large budget with a lot going on, but I'll explain an overarching picture of it. I'll explain to the process, how it gets made. Again, we're right smack dab in the middle of it. I'll share what's at stake in this budget. I definitely want to just call out the elephant in the room with the changes to the federal government and potential cuts that may be coming and how we will need to address those if they come to light. And then I also want to take some time to bring you into the fight for budget justice in our New York State budget. Next slide, please. So some community agreements. One, Mike, if you have a question, sorry, unless you have a question, I mean, I know we're introducing ourselves right now, but as the evening proceeds, avoiding getting into any back and forths in the comment section, that can be distracting from people trying to hear the presentation. Number two, assume and act in good faith. Assume everyone on this call has the best intentions, even if they phrase something in a way that wouldn't be the way that you phrased it. but assume the best intentions, and then my staff will keep track. If anyone is acting in bad faith, they will be removed from the Zoom. Try to keep things positive on the call. And then number 3, just remain on topic. Please keep your questions on topic to the New York State budget. If you have other questions for me and my office, we will tell you how to contact us at the end of the event. Next slide. So the big question on everyone's mind, what is New York's state budget? Next slide. So we're going to cover what services and supports will be funded by the state and what revenue will pay for them. Next slide. For those who don't know, the New York State budget is not on the calendar year. It is on its own year. It starts April of the year and goes to the end of March in the following year. So this budget we're working on now is slotted to begin April 1st of this year and carry on to March 31st of next year. So technically we're right now in the previous year's budget, finishing that out before we get on to the next one. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to put a poll up on the screen because I want to get your input about things that are important to you in the state budget. Okay, so the poll should be launched. This is a ranked poll, so you can you see 7 options on the screen. This is not the entirety of what's in the budget, but these are 7 large issue areas, so you can go ahead and rank those, and I'll give you some time to do that. Okay, got about 25 responses so far. I'll give a little bit more time. And for those just joining, we are just at the beginning of our budget presentation, and there's a poll on the screen asking you, on your own personal opinion, to rank what you think should be important in the budget. Here we go, 47 responses. I'm gonna give a little bit more time, see if we can get to 50 responses. You're like another 15 seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now, sharing the results. Okay, so you should be able on your screen to see the results. And if you hover over, you can see it's color-coded by how people ranked it. So I think you can see for education, there were a lot of people putting that first, second, or third. Health is up there as well, first, second. And then you have things like, mental health or childcare having a lot more rankings as 6th or a lot of people as, first as well, but a lot more at 6th or 7th. This is really cool. Thank you for participating in that. I want to show you now, if we go to the next screen, please. Or sorry, next slide, please. This is a sample of a previous year, the breakdown. So you can see on your screen, this is a pie chart of where the bulk of the funding went. So you can see the top 2 categories right there in the state budget are education and the arts, as well as health, with the next followers up being higher education, mental, hygiene, transportation, a few other categories, and then, a sort of miscellaneous category of all other at 11%. This is a sample. It's not always this exact amount every single year, but this is the general sort of breakdown, with the bulk of our state budget going into our hospitals and health sector at large and into education. Next slide, please. In addition to money in the budget, oftentimes policy is passed through the budget. That includes legislation with fiscal impact, and also sometimes legislation with no fiscal impact. This is an ongoing issue. It does give additional advantages to the governor in negotiating the budget, predominantly because she can set the initial agenda, choose which bills are negotiated, and even make line edits to take specific pieces out of budget bills. It also allows for more intervention from big dollar interests. Next slide. There is also state funding for CBOs. So sometimes CBOs, or community-based organizations, are lined out in the budget, but you can also request state funding through your legislators. And I will say, your respective legislators, I see people on this call who are not necessarily from District 25, I welcome you, but all state legislators have discretionary funds, which can be used for operational costs at a CBO, such as like hiring staff, issuing programming, or capital funds to do physical infrastructure, like replacing roofs and things of that nature. The link for my district, at least, is there, bit.ly/SD25 fund. I'm asking you to apply there by May 1st. If you live in another district, your legislator may have a different process. They may not even have a link or an online form, but feel free to reach out to them for what their process is. And one thing to know is that state funding is always on a reimbursement basis, meaning that if you are approved for funding, your CBO would need to be able to spend the funds first, then show your receipts and get reimbursed by the state. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to share the budget timeline with you. Next slide. So what we just happened last month, January, is what we call the executive budget. It's the first move in the budget process. And it is where the governor presents her vision of the budget, called the executive budget, and she shares it with the legislature and the public. So that's a public document. You could Google it right now and see the executive budget in all its glory. It's many, many hundreds of pages long. That's a very public document, and it's out there already, and that's the first step. Next slide, please. Where we are now in February is the series of budget hearings. These are a series of public hearings where we talk to the agencies about what's in the budget, but also hear from advocacy groups, nonprofits, everyday people about how the budget is impacting them, what they want to see in the state budget. These are some images on the screen of the Human Services hearing, both some panelists and also the elected officials who were on the dais asking them questions. Next, sorry, before we go to the next slide, you can also, if you want to watch them, they're not all done yet. There are a few more coming up, but if you go to that QR code, you can see the online link where they are posted, because they're all recorded. So you can watch previous hearings and see who was questioned, who attended, and what was said. Next slide. And yes, fun fact, the mayor himself does need to come up to Albany and ask for specific budget priorities from the state legislature. So that is the mayor from the hearing he attended earlier this month. And yeah, that's just one example of how New York City is impacted by the New York State budget. Next slide. Where we're moving to next is what are known as the One House budgets. So again, the first in January, the governor presented her vision of the budget, the executive budget. February, you have the legislature doing these hearings, asking questions, pulling it apart. All that is with the goal of making edits to the governor's proposal to release our own version. And they're called One House because both the Senate is a house and the Assembly is a house. So the Senate releases its proposal for the budget, so does the Assembly. And you can see on the screen, just for those who don't know, the Senate is 63 members and the Assembly is 150 members. Next slide, please. After all three budget proposals are released, that of the governor, that of the Senate, and the Assembly, we go into what are known as three-way negotiations, and that's done between three respective teams, the team of the governor. On the bottom, you can see the state Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, her team. And then also there is the Speaker of the Assembly, Carl Heastie, his team. This concept, this part of the budget process used to be known as three men in a room. When all three leaders were men, it is now called three people in a room. But it is a part of the budget where legislators such as myself are actually not privy to the full negotiations. We get updates from our leadership, but the actual negotiations are done fully between the governor, the leader, and the speaker, and their respective teams. Next slide. And I'm not going to read all of these, but by April 1st, the full budget is due. And the budget is split across 10 bills of various issue areas. I will highlight in the first column the revenue bill. That is the bill that involves all the tax code, which is arguably the most important one, as it leads to how we pay for the remainder of the bills. I will talk more about the revenue and tax code later on in the presentation. But I will also mention that the votes on these bills are public. They're in public record. They're also live streamed. Sometimes the votes happen after midnight, so you may be asleep. And sometimes the text of the bills is actually only made public a few hours before the vote, which is unfortunate. It is due April 1st, although in multiple years past it has been late, as we struggled to reach an agreement with the governor in a timely fashion. Next slide, please. This is some Albany jargon, the big ugly. Typically, at least one of the bills will loop in all the most controversial aspects of budget negotiations with the most desirable aspects. Again, in our process, the governor has the vast bulk of the power, so the big ugly is crafted by the governor. One example may be several years ago where the governor wanted to consider changes to the criminal code, specifically around bail reform, and do rollbacks to it, which the legislature was strongly opposed to. But the final budget, the big ugly that year, lumped in the changes to the criminal code and essentially increases to mass incarceration alongside funding for schools and childcare and things that were very desirable. So that's one example of where the lopsided power in the budget process can force legislators into uncomfortable positions. And I'm not tracking all the questions as I speak in the chat, but I do see will this presentation be shared with attendees after, and yes, we are recording and we can send it out. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I'm gonna give a little break for people just to process, and then we will be back in about 5 minutes or 4 minutes. Yeah, it's 7:25. Thank you. We're still on break, but I'm just going to answer at least one question I saw in the chat about education and art being lumped together in the pie chart. In the chat, I'm going to share the website from openbudget.newyork.gov, which is where the pie chart came from. And then I'm also below that a breakdown further where you can see specifically within the piece that is education arts, how much money was allocated to each that year. And it has the other pieces as well too, but the question was about education and art. Okay, and it's 7:25. Let's keep going. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, and I want to talk about what's at stake in this year's budget. And I think we'll start off with another poll. We can put that up. Okay, you should have a poll on your screen asking you what you think, how unequal, in terms of the gap between rich and poor, do you think New York is compared to the other 50 states? So on a scale of 1 to 50, 1 being the most unequal in America, to 50 being the least unequal, the most fair, where do you think we rank? Got about 38 responses so far. I'm gonna wait a little bit longer. Giving it 15 more seconds. Okay, that's time. Let's share the results. Huh. Looks like the results are not sharing. Okay, sorry for the technical. I wish I would love to share the results with you, but let's go to the next slide. Okay, so for those who selected number 1, congratulations, you are correct. New York is rated the most unequal state in the country. That's a sources Statista, where of all the states in America, we actually have the greatest divide between the rich and the poor. Next slide. Again, addressing the elephant in the room, federal budget cuts under Trump. So we have an estimated $250 billion-ish budget in New York State for this year. 93.1 or approximately that much would come from the federal government. So I know that there were threats to cut funding or to pause funding, which were overturned in the courts, but are also still being litigated. But I do want to point out that a significant amount of New York's budget does come from the federal government, and attacks from the current administration would have a huge impact on our states and our social services. There, in addition to the legal challenges to pause or stop or overturn the executive orders, there is the push to raise taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers to offset any cuts that may be coming from the federal government. Next slide, please. Here are some potential cuts The top two we have there for you are Medicaid and SNAP. Those are the national figures that would come from removing these programs. We don't have the New York State specific figures for you yet, but if you're very interested, we can find them for you and send them after the call. But the bottom one is $15 billion, a hole to the MTA if Trump indeed succeeds in ending congestion pricing, which would drastically impact our ability to get new signals, to get the trains to run on time, update our trains, expand elevator access for our disabled and elderly community members, and so on and so forth. Next slide. So again, I mentioned, there is the ongoing litigation to fight against federal cuts, but there is the fact that, one of the additional facts to New York being one of the most unequal state in the country is that we have an incredibly large number of extremely wealthy people here in New York, and taxing the ultra rich could make up for the federal cuts and offset Trump's likely cuts for the wealthy. Especially if he wants to give tax breaks to many of them, we could, raise their taxes to offset what they are no longer paying at the federal level. Next slide. In addition to being the #1 most unequal state in the country, New York has more millionaires than any other city in the world. This is another reason why we should tax the rich. Here are a package of bills that have been proposed from the Invest in Our New York coalition, ranging from changes to their personal income to the taxes on their corporations and large businesses, capital gains taxes. Those are taxes on gains you make from selling off stocks, taxing inheritance wealth, updating the estate tax to really make sure we're looking at those large inheritances that are being passed on. These are just a variety. These are some of the most popular options we have on the table for taxing the ultra rich. Next slide. Here are some hot button issues in the New York State budget right now. The governor's proposal edits foundation aid. Foundation aid is the formula by which the state decides how much money to give to schools where in the state. And with the governor's current proposal, New York City would see $300 million less for our schools than we were planning to under the previous formula. That's obviously a fight I'm very concerned about as a former public school teacher, is making sure New York City gets what it was expecting and what it deserves so that we can keep on funding the education of our students. Next slide. Also, hospitals and Medicaid equity, our healthcare sector is still drastically underfunded. It suffered a lot of austerity under the previous governor. We are looking for ways, again, taxing the rich and other ways to increase funding for hospitals. And also on your screen, you'll see some legislative proposals, whether that's the fair pay for home care to make sure our home care attendants are well compensated so they can stay in the field and avoid high turnover, keeping our hospitals open and funded. It was a big fight last year to push back against the governor's proposal to close SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn. And it's issues like that that we need to keep fighting against. And also increasing Medicaid eligibility for seniors and the disabled. That's a legislative proposal on the table. There are many more. These are just some samples. Next slide. Here's also one of my priorities as the chair of the Committee on Children and Families, which is universal childcare, which right now is so expensive for parents across the city, the state, and the country, and also really hard to stay in the field for the workers. They do not get paid enough by any means necessary in again, our city, our state, or the country. So the Universal Child Care Act would push for universal child care where it's free, available to all parents, just the way our public schools are. You can enroll your child for free in any public school, and make sure the child care workers are paid fairly as educators. And if you want to learn more about my bill, the Universal Child Care Act, you can go to that bit.ly. Written at the bottom, it's bit.ly/childcareact. Next slide. Highest demand for childcare right now is a $1.2 billion investment in the workforce so we can rapidly build up New York's childcare sector to create a universal childcare system in the years to come. Next slide. If you want to join the fight for budget justice, I'll leave this up on the screen for a little bit. You can go to that bit.ly or use the QR code. but the bit.ly is bit.ly/SD25-volunteer, and we'll be able to have future ways to plug you into fights around the budget and ensuring that you can activate your voice and do everything you need to do to make sure that we get the best opportunities for our community in the state budget. I'll leave it up there for a second before going on to the next slide. Okay, so next slide, we will go to Q&A. I'm again reiterate our community agreements from the top. One mic, assume and act in good faith, remain on topic. And I'm going to go through some questions that have come up already. We have a question from Christina Raymond from CUC 16 in Bed-Stuy, hearing our thoughts on the potential cut of around $350 million to New York City public schools. Yeah, no, I think it's a bad idea. So what some changes we're proposing, because it is a change to the formula that resulted in it. Some changes we're considering countering the governor's proposal with is adding in considerations for English language learner students, because New York City has a much higher population of immigrant students, and also adding in more considerations for homeless students. 1 in 10 students in New York City are homeless, and I don't think those are accounted for in the proposal that she put forward, but we do think that would level the playing field. And then the other option too is to try to just avoid touching it, which I think is less likely. I think we may need to end up with some form of edit. So I think that we'll end up going down the route of trying to add in considerations for things that New York City is experiencing that other parts of the state may not be experiencing to a certain level. And then we have a question from Beth Gordon. I'm hoping to learn more about how the budget changes will impact the New York City school system. Yeah, if New York City does have less funding than it was expecting, that could affect things from class sizes to after school programs to capital improvements on the buildings. So again, we're working really hard to make sure that we do not see any less than we were expecting. And we have Sean Mullane from Bed-Stuy, worried about federal education cuts as a public education teacher. Yeah, those cuts, they have not materialized yet. They're still being litigated, and the goal will always be to see how we can make up for any of those cuts by raising taxes on the wealthy, if indeed they do materialize from the federal sector. We have a question about how much of the state budget is federally funded. I answered that already, but we had a slide earlier saying about 93 billion of the 250. A question from Vanetta Rose, where is childcare in the pie? Childcare is typically in the budget bill that's known as ELFA, E-L-F-A, that's Education, Labor, and Family Assistance. Ariel Charney, how will the federal budget reconciliation impact the New York State budget? What are the major risks of the budget we should focus advocacy efforts on? From what I'm hearing, the biggest threat from the federal government would be Medicaid, which would drastically decrease the amount of funding that goes to our hospitals, which could play out in a variety of different ways. But again, that has not materialized yet. So we are working to make sure that we are prepared. And I'm a big advocate for making sure that we try to offset any of the cuts that may happen. Okay, we have a question from Christina Sparik. Can you give examples of how Trump will impact our everyday lives? I mean, it depends on what he wins in the courts. I think at this point, nearly all of his executive orders have been challenged in the courts. The biggest threat was when they wanted to pause funding to states that have engaged in sanctuary policies, but that was overturned. He's now threatening to stop congestion pricing, which would negatively impact your subway ride and your bus ride, but that is again being litigated. Ricardo asks, will people be required to work for some benefits, and will food stamps be cut 20%? Many benefits are currently means tested. I can't speak to exactly which ones you want to know you have to work for. And as for food stamps being cut 20%, that has not materialized yet. And there are proposals from I didn't mention in the slide deck at the state level to increase SNAP benefits. There's a few different proposals, whether to incentivize an extra money for fruits and vegetables at your local grocery store, to just having a flat fee increase for anybody on SNAP benefits, just increase at the state level. I think regardless of whether or not there are cuts at the federal level. Laura Marte asks, how can we fight back in an effective manner? One, definitely on the slide deck I had earlier, if you didn't sign up, we can share it again. But you can plug in and we can do an organizer training, but then also you can reach out. I think I missed earlier if you're one of my constituents or not, but you can reach out to me or your local legislator about what you want to see in the budget, and ask how best you can raise your voice. Okay, Blaine Renier asks, all good ideas, assuming the worst and taxing the ultra-rich doesn't pass, what's plan B? Well, if there are cuts from the federal government and we don't offset the cuts with increased revenue on the rich, then the cuts materialize. So the plan B would be austerity, which I'm very opposed to. But that would be the next step. Chizen M asks, how can we make sure that NYC correctly doles out the money such that what happened with those childcare centers won't happen again? If on the state level, the money makes its way to NYC and it's not properly being distributed, what is there to do? Who's responsible? That's a great question. What's great is that our budgets are staggered. So the New York State budget is due April 1st. The New York City budget is due end of June, I believe. So after we've sort of given it to New York City, it's then in the hands of the mayor and also your city council to make sure the money is allocated correctly. Ken Granderson asks, are there any initiatives that prioritize using advanced technologies like generative AI to significantly accelerate the efficacy of state agencies, better analyze and strategize how to address long-standing problems, and generally leverage the combined best practices in most fields that are directly available to anyone these days? The governor does have an Empire AI initiative to do deeper research into artificial intelligence in general. I do not know, and we may need to get back to after the call, if the goal of Empire AI is to make state agencies specifically more efficient. I do know at one of her State of the States, I think last year, she wanted to have New York get the reputation as the Silicon Valley of AI. So I think her initiative may be more so about having New York be a well-researched hub of artificial intelligence in general. So I'm not sure if it's being used necessarily to increase efficiency of state agencies. And obviously there are concerns over that too, with generative AI still prone to hallucinations, would not want to give the general public false information from a state agency using AI. Long asks, can you talk more about the governor's proposed cuts on foundation aid? I'm an NYC DOE student and I'm very concerned. What is it specifically? What is going to be cut from schools that benefit from foundation aid? So basically what happened is that she updated what she was looking at, or what we are looking at as New York State. The previous formula was based on data from 2000. The more updated one looks at more recent data, and the more recent data basically shows that the proportion of working class people in New York City compared to the rest of the state has shifted from 2000 to more recently, which frankly makes sense. A lot of working class people are just leaving New York City because they can't afford it. And with the rents being higher here, it does make sense that more people are being forced to leave New York City than are being forced to leave other cities upstate. But I will reiterate what I said before. We want to add additional considerations, that it's not just about the exact proportion of working class people, but also how many are having to learn a new language, how many are homeless, some additional considerations that should be part of the Foundation Aid formula. And to the question of what is going to be cut from schools, that would be, honestly, that would be a city level decision. So the Foundation Aid is a lump sum of money that is then given to the school district. So essentially it would just be less money that New York City is getting from New York State. And it would be up to the mayor and the chancellor to figure out how to respond to that. So I wouldn't be able to tell you. And again, we're trying to avoid that. Dana asks, is there a concern amidst the legal battles federally that funds could be allocated and then ultimately recalled? I have not heard that concern yet. It's a good concern to raise. I would need to look into that, about money being recalled from the federal level. Mika asks, can you explain why bail reform is a budget issue? Oh, it's not. And that was a very frustrating episode where the governor wanted to do it and wanted to make changes to bail reform and knew that she would never get a bill passed from the legislature. So she forced it into the budget to force us to vote on it. Okay, Christina Sparrock asks, wouldn't these litigations financially drain New York City? I'm assuming these fights against Trump can last years. Yeah, I can't speak to how long the litigation fights will last. I think that's a good concern to bring up. I would say with the amount of money that's at stake, though, I think it's worth it. I mean, if the choice is to spend money in litigation or to lose billions of dollars in funding for schools or hospitals, I think just the benefits of pursuing litigation and winning outweigh the negatives. Lucy asks, is there any effort to bring back a small tax on stock transfers? This does not hurt the working middle class. It used to exist until Senator Martin Connor of Brooklyn killed it. Yeah, I forget who carries the bill. I think it's Senator James Sanders in the Senate. I forget who in the Assembly, but there is a proposed tax on stock transfers. I think it's called a financial transactions tax, and I think it puts a tax on transfers, other financial instruments in addition to stocks. That's a great one. I support it, and you're right. I don't think I had it on my slide of the main ones that are being fought for, but I support that one and love that one. Christina, do you anticipate a recession with these cuts? I don't know if I can speak to that. I mean, I do think austerity can trigger a recession if you are taking away social services and also really just taking away jobs and making it harder for people to live. They have less spending money, and that creates a less really brutal cycle. But I would need to get back about the exact interplay. Laura Marte asks, how will our Bed-Stuy community will suffer concerning these budget cuts, such as safety parks, et cetera? Yeah, how this will play out on a local level, and my apologies to those who are not my constituents, although I am very happy you're here. But for example, if these Medicaid cuts happen and we do not make up for the cuts in the state budgets for any federal cuts, then you may see issues at Woodhull Hospital, at Interfaith Hospital. If these education cuts happen, it may affect the ability to expand after school at many of our schools in Bed-Stuy and throughout the district. Again, we're out, really fighting, hoping litigation wins, but feeling that also pushing for higher taxes on the wealthy to offset any federal cuts that we get. LA Cherokee Dickens asks, we are a nonprofit fighting to open the first farmers market supermarket in Brownsville. Is funding being allotted to food security? And if so, does it fall under health? Yes, there is funding allotted to food security. I believe we fund, in addition to proposals to enhance, SNAP benefits. There is also money for the large food distributors like the Food Bank of New York City, Grow NYC. And then there is another great proposal which essentially links food banks with upstate farmers that the government pays for. It's a win-win situation. The food banks get food, the upstate farmers who are struggling get money, and it brings their fresh fruits and vegetables and products down to New York City. Isabella Guhan asks, are there talks about increasing CUNY tuition? And will there be cuts to CUNY and SUNY? I don't remember seeing any increases to the tuition. Will there be cuts to CUNY and SUNY? I don't remember seeing any. I will make a note to get back to you on that. I don't think I saw any potential cuts. I do know that, frequently be fought for what's known as the New Deal for CUNY in the state legislature, which would be to make CUNY free again for all students and also fund the workers, the professors better. And there is a similar proposal for SUNY, and we did avoid the cuts or the closure of SUNY downstate last year, which was a big fight. Kristen asked, do you have any insights into impacts on abortion care protections for abortion care funding, practical support funds, abortion care training education, especially if Medicaid is cut and impacts hospitals? We started putting in a ton of protections when Roe v. Wade fell. The biggest one being the Equal Rights Amendment, which just passed. Thank you for those of you who voted for it in this past election in November. This was a long process. It's a constitutional amendment, which means it has to be passed twice by two different versions of the state legislature and then go to a full vote. So it did pass, and that did enshrine abortion protections into the New York State Constitution. We also have a variety of other legislation that passed. I can look for a package to send you, Kristen, and out to the general crowd. But I do know we have done things such as protecting medical professionals, shield laws, protecting people from litigation, not allowing medical providers needing to share information if another state tries to sue. For example, if a woman comes to New York State to get an abortion because she's in a state that's banned it, New York State would not need to give up her information or divulge anything to help law enforcement authorities from the other state that's trying to pursue action against her. But there are a variety of tactics we've taken, and I can send a longer list after. Cherie asks, would EOC attained with SUNY programs be affected by federal cuts? That one I am not sure about. I would need to get back to you. Teresa asks, when is New York going to end the Regents exam now that the Department of Education is moving to the states? Is there going to be an education reform? That I'm not also sure what the status of that proposal is, but also I don't think that's going to be addressed in this budget. Blake asked, there's uncertainty around New York City's mayor. Does this mean the city needs to submit a new budget if we get a new mayor, or would we/he be tied to the same city budget? I think that completely depends on who is mayor during the budget process. Yeah, the city budget is a negotiation between the city council and whoever the current mayor is. Ariel asks, do the Medicaid cuts mean insurance coverage could be taken away for certain eligible groups? I will look into that. I don't think anyone would be no longer covered by Medicaid. I'm fairly certain it would mean hospitals would get reimbursed less money for serving a Medicaid patient, which is already an issue, which is that hospitals get reimbursed less for serving a patient on Medicaid than a patient on private insurance, which is why many hospitals in working class communities, which serve more Medicaid patients, are underfunded. They literally get less money for doing the same things as hospitals that serve people on private insurance. So I don't think it's a scenario necessarily where you would be denied treatments or be told that you're no longer covered by Medicaid. It may be a more systemic issue where your hospital that you go to just has less money, which means they need to make really difficult decisions about how they operate. What is the funding? Gina asked, what is the funding for the homeless to afford low-income housing? Presently, Housing Connect is not providing such services with Trump cutting rental assistance. Yeah, one thing we are pushing for at the state level is called the Housing Access Voucher Program. It is a fund to essentially create a state version of Section 8. It will be state-funded vouchers to help our homeless neighbors find stable and permanent housing. It has been a proposal from the legislature virtually every single budget. The governor fights against it every single budget, but would really like to get it into this year's budget this year. Isabella asked, what is the likelihood of the Campuses with Emergency Contraception Act passing as it's an unfunded mandate? Bill number is S2058. I am not sure what the likelihood of it passing is yet. I would need to talk to the bill sponsors. They're usually more privy to what the debate is around the bill, who is pushing against it, and what the top concerns are. So I would need to get back to you on that one. Apologize. Do you think there is a chance pharmacists will receive pay for prescribing birth control in New York State this budget cycle? That is another one I will need to get back to you on, Isabella. My apologies. Okay, that is the end of the questions I see. I'm surprised we kept it to an hour, but I will pause in case there are additional questions. Anna Gardner asks, at what point in the budget timeline is advocacy from constituents most effective? All times are good. In terms of who your targets are, right now it is your legislators and the governor. When we go into the 3 people in a room negotiations, still your legislators, because we get updates from leadership, but primarily it would be leadership of the bodies, and as well as the governor. And the timeline for 3 people in a room starts like mid-March up until April 1st. But in terms of what's most effective, I mean, people have been pounding, the pavement already hard now. So right now you're in it. So feel free to, if I'm your senator, Anna, to me, whatever you want to see in the budget, or to reach out to your legislators. Okay, so let's go to the final slide just so we can give people next steps. Okay, so if you want to get any additional updates from my office, there's a bit.ly at the top, bit.ly/SD25-updates. And then if you want to get support from my office, that is our phone number and our email address, and then also the physical address of our office, which is by appointment only, especially because there are days when my office is virtual, but very responsive over phone and email. And then just flagging, because I know that there are people from all over the state on this call, which I do love. If I am not your senator, I will redirect you to your senator, just to make sure that we can adequately support all of my own personal constituents, for any constituent complaints you have. But we'll make sure you're redirected in a quickly and timely fashion. Okay, and I will end it there. I hope this was efficient and helpful for you all. My office is an open door if you have additional questions. We will send out the recording, and I will find answers to those questions that I could not answer on this call. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your nights. Have a good dinner and get some rest. We got a lot of fighting to do. Have a good night.